gets to Jerusalem and is finally arrested and then tried, crucified, and then is raised from the dead. Because in Luke's gospel, from the later part of chapter 9 of Luke until the end, Jesus is either on his way to Jerusalem, or he's in Jerusalem. And it's the only place where a prophet can die. And it's all the things that he says and does on his way up there that kind of set the stage for what's about to happen to him. Because all of these things that he does, these things that he says, the parables that he gives, are ultimately a challenge to the way people have been thinking and acting, and even the way people have been praying. Not necessarily because they've been bad, but because of the kind of the distortion of faith that they have been experiencing, particularly those who were sort of felt that they were on the fringes, because they couldn't live up to the law as they had, been taught it, and as they had it, themselves exposed to it through going to the synagogue or making their occasional trips to the temple in Jerusalem. So anyway, before Jesus starts up towards Jerusalem, you have this one of the two debtors and the master in chapter 7 of Luke. And in that one, he asks the Pharisee, Jesus is in the Pharisee's home, and the Pharisee's on Jesus' case because he didn't wash before dinner. And but the woman comes in and is crying on Jesus' feet and wiping them with her hair, and then she gets ready to anoint his feet with that precious ointment. And Jesus tells the little parable about the two men owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him, 50, and the other owed him 5,000. Which one will love him more if he forgives the debt? And the Pharisee in whose house Jesus is meeting says, well, I presume the one to whom he has forgiven more. And then he goes on and teaches how those who are forgiven much love much. So he's talking about the woman who is, a sinner, and because she has experienced this great act of forgiveness by God, this real act of mercy, she can then be loving towards him. So, if you've been forgiven much, then you're capable of loving much. And then the other parables are much more, familiar. There's the Good Samaritan, and then there are the three parables in Luke chapter 15, the lost coin, the lost sheep, the lost coin, and then finally the prodigal son. And then Luke 16:19, which at this moment is eluding me. And then Luke 18 is about the rich man and Lazarus. Maybe that was 16. 18 was about the unjust judge. And then the other part of 18 was the gospel from this past Sunday, which it dealt with humility, the Pharisee and the publican. So Jesus tells 7 of those 8 on his way up to Jerusalem. It just so happens that in this Sunday's gospel, it's about Zacchaeus. It's not a parable, but it's again another story of mercy where the Lord sees Zacchaeus up in the tree, little shorty there who's up the tree because he can't see, and he's the tax collector, so nobody really cared whether Zacchaeus could see anything or not because they figured he was a bum anyway. But he's there, and then Jesus fixes his gaze on him and says, Zacchaeus, hurry down. I must stay at your house today. It's this Jesus reaching out to Zacchaeus because he recognizes in Zacchaeus someone who needs this mercy of God, someone that needs to be touched, someone that's got, I guess, maybe Jesus recognized that he was on the edge of converting, because as soon as he gets Jesus at his house, he says, I'm going to pay back fourfold anything that I've, misappropriated, and a couple other things that are said in the text, and he goes far beyond what the law ever would have required, because he's, again, in this case, he feels so forgiven. He's been forgiven much, and so now he's capable then of loving much. So that's, what we're going to hear on Sunday. Now, you don't have to listen to me on Sunday now because you've already heard it. But it's, again, it's an example, and throughout the Scriptures, God is the one who does the revealing of himself to humankind. God creates, and then there's Adam and Eve, and so God is disclosing himself, but not certainly as fully as comes later. But immediately upon the original sin, God does not close the door definitively on the human race. That beyond God's justice, as it says in the Quality of Mercy speech there, is God's love. And it's this love of God that is the root of the mercy of God, this desire to show compassion, to give forgiveness, to embrace, to welcome in. All of that comes out of the love that God has for his creation, and in particular the height of creation, which are human beings. You and me are the special objects of the love of God. And this is one of the things that we see in Jesus, that Jesus is there and bringing in flesh the love of God and the mercy of God to everybody, but especially to those who are the sinners, those who are, on the margins, those who've been kind of pushed aside, those who, so you've got the sick, you've got the poor, you've got, strangers, you've got people who have not measured up to what the Pharisees were saying that you needed to do. All of those people are the ones who get the special attention of Jesus. The message is for everybody, but the people who were usually skipped over, missed, ignored, are the ones that Jesus goes to, and appeals to first, which is one of the things that you see in how Christianity spread, and how even today the inroads that are made in various cultures is precisely because Christians will go to the people that nobody else wants to deal with. For example, in India, those who have evangelized among the so-called untouchables in the caste system are the Christians. They're the ones that went to the Dalits, and in other countries too. Back in the first century, the Roman Christians were the subject of admiration and also of wonderment by the regular population, because instead of allowing somebody to die in the street, or this old person thrown off in the pile somewhere, or a baby discarded because somebody didn't want the child, that the Christians took care of the sick, they took care of the injured, they looked after the orphan, they took care of the widow. They did all of these things because this was an extension, really, of the mercy of God that they had experienced in Christ. And that's one of the things that moved a lot of the pagans to consider becoming Christian, because it seemed like this is really the way life ought to be, rather than this attitude of, it's just as soon see them die or kill them than have to deal with them. And even today, it still creates, I think, some wonderment in people that Christians are not necessarily the first ones to want to nuke somebody. And that, we try to still see what is good in others, or what is it that God is calling us, almost compelling us to bring to people that are, kind of beyond his reach, they because of where they've placed themselves. One of the things it says in this book here, and you probably have a copy, it's probably in the papers that I gave you, is that mercy is not a natural virtue that depends on a person's character. The most virtuous person is not necessarily more merciful than somebody else. Instead, mercy is a question of an inner disposition that matures as one spends time with Jesus. This is how we learn mercy. So, you could be a person of great, like he says, of great virtue here. You could be, honest and have great integrity and all of these other things, but not necessarily be a truly merciful person.
I think